This is my best kind of show notes because we didn't touch one of them, not even one of them. I'm not sure which one is Paul Rudd and which one is Lane Green.
Final card here is the ultimate outcome.
Today is Take Your Dog to Work Day.
Oh, like Scooby-Doo.
Yeah. Without further ado, his debut.
Sweet Caroline.
Everybody say hello to Sammy. Is it not good?
I'm just pausing so that you just are at the front of your screen.
I'm so enormously flattered.
Branding is not a bad blind date.
I'm gonna have to take a picture of this.
No, this is agape. This is love.
I really enjoyed this. You did do your homework. You asked great questions.
I'm flattered. Thank you. You just made my day.
Look at you! You are insane.
How did I do that?
You're
how
insane.
Did I do that?
You're insane.
Well, welcome everybody. Times are tough, as you all know, living in the middle of a global pandemic with epidemics associated with, well, that's part of my seated soliloquy, racism, economic failure. I mean, I've taken to a lemonade stand, 5 cents for a glass of lemonade. Support Joseph Jaffe and CoronaTV. Why do I have a lemonade stand? Well, you're going to find out soon enough. I have the one, the only Tom Morris, who is a public philosopher. He's the world's happiest philosopher, which is probably a bit of a contradiction. You expect them to be, I mean, I've never met any of the greats, but from what I've heard, I don't know that they walk around being overly optimistic, but that's what we're going to talk about today. It's going to be absolutely awesome. And I get very inspired when I'm around people like Tom Morris. So today is, it's actually National Be Someone Day. And the thing about this is it's not like be someone else, which I thought maybe initially it was like kind of, it's also National Junk Food Day. So I'm definitely not going to celebrate that. I went for a nice 4-mile walk run this morning, not a walk, a run this morning. So forget about the junk food, but let me tell you a little bit about Be Someone Day. Project Harmony actually founded Be Someone Day, and it was designed to help end child abuse and bring communities together through education and awareness. The registrar at National Day calendar proclaimed the day to be observed annually on July 21st. And so that's actually what we're celebrating today. So I just thought I would share that with you. Making a difference in someone's life, it is important. As I've been mentioning, and now you know why, Tom Morris, besides being a public philosopher, besides being a double PhD, so does that mean you have to call him doctor, or professor? I don't know. But he also his latest book is called Plato's Lemonade Stand. So hence the lemonade stand behind me, and you'll meet him soon enough. Tom is my interview today, my guest, my VIP. And then, of course, Bob, Jane, and David will round out another amazing week of incredible conversations with wonderful, wonderful people. Just to reiterate, if you love the show, if you want to really be more connected with the show, you can actually subscribe to my weekly newsletter, which for now I'm focusing on and really focusing it on the show. And this is an example of what you'll see in the newsletter. You'll get a sneak preview of the guests for the following week. You'll get my take on the highlights of the previous week's guests, and you'll also get all of the copy associated with my 5 seated soliloquies. So hopefully that is enough value for you to consider subscribing to the show, or at least to the newsletter. So a bunch of happy birthdays today. On Facebook, Andy Porteous, I met him when he was my client at Unilever, Danny Heenan Rangers in South Africa, and then of course to all of my LinkedIn connections as well. Hope you are having a great day and keeping cool if you're in the Northeast. We're going through a bit of a heat wave here in the US. Well, my seated soliloquy, as you know, is always associated with my guest, inspired, I should say, by my guest. And today is all about optimism. Why not, right? Have you ever heard, people say, what's the difference between an optimist and a pessimist? Well, if you answer that the optimist sees the glass as half full, whereas the pessimist sees it as half empty, you'd be a little bit off the mark. Or at least I have a different take based on something I once heard. A real optimist is someone who, when the glass is completely empty and maybe even cracked or shattered, believes that one day soon, someday soon, it will not only be full once again, but overflowing. Right now, people are struggling mentally, physically, emotionally, financially. It's hard to make lemonades from lemons when the lemons themselves are rotten, moldy, and infested with bugs. They say the darkest hour is just before dawn, but that's not true either. I can actually attest that the darkest hour is probably sometime around 3 a.m. And how do I know? Because I'm typically awake with insomnia and riddled with anxiety at this awful time. So how do we pull ourselves out of the quicksand of the epidemics or pandemics of COVID, racism, failed leadership, and or partisan divide? Damned if I know. I never wrote Plato's Lemonade Stand, now did I? But I do have some ideas. I think one of the most needed superpowers right now is perspective. And if you're keeping score at home, perspective joins the other superheroes or superpowers that I've mentioned lately of generosity, endurance, patience, and empathy. Everything is relative, right? Even your relatives. Our ability to zoom in and zoom out in order to gain new insights, alter our outlook or approach, and ultimately to evolve and enhance our perspective will determine our eventual outcome and hopefully success. You think you're rich? Someone's richer. You think you're poor? Someone's poorer. You think you're good looking? You're not Joseph Jaffe, are you? You think you're happy? Awesome. I think that's good enough. Choosing to live a life of optimism is by definition optimistic, but it should be equally realistic, pragmatic, validated through actions that reinforce a life worth living, a life to be grateful for, a life of hope, positivity, and optimism. And that really, for me, just rolled off the tongue when I thought about my guest, Tom Morris. Now, this is going to take a little bit of time to introduce him, but I feel that it's completely worth it. In fact, you know what? I'm going to just do this, which is, let's focus on him for a moment, shall we? Performance, leadership, success, change, commitment. Imagine the wisdom of Yoda, Gandalf, and Dumbledore rolled together and linked to the spirit and energy of the world's most winning athletic coaches. Stir in the unexpected humor of a Seinfeld or Fallon, and you have Tom Morris. With a double PhD from Yale University, as well as honorary doctorates in recognition of his public work, he's gone from being one of the most popular professors ever at Notre Dame, where he has taught for 15 years, to now becoming one of the world's top public philosophers and pioneering business thinkers. He's the author of over 30 groundbreaking books, and his work has been covered by most American television networks, major newspapers, and magazines. And most importantly, he's also been described as the world's happiest philosopher. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Tom Morris. Welcome to the show, Tom.
Great to be with you, Joseph.
I love that whole, Dumbledore and Seinfeld, and it's just I have an image, and this is the image.
People are grasping for straws. How do you describe a philosopher? As a matter of fact, you're quite a philosopher, man. That was a great soliloquy. Thanks for that. Awesome setup.
Well, thank you, because it was inspired by yourself.
Well,
so,
I feel like I'm in the presence of Socrates, but we'll drink lemonade today and not the poison hemlock, right?
Well, and the beautiful thing about it is that we'll get to it, but you've got this amazing approach where you've mashed up a philosopher with a corporation or a brand. So we'll talk about that in a second. But first of all, I think you are the first philosopher that I've had on the show. And so I thought it might be interesting. Well, I mean, look, there are a lot of self-proclaimed philosophers. So this, according to the dictionary, is what philosophy is: the study of the fundamental nature of knowledge, reality, and existence, especially when considered as an academic discipline. But the words that jump out for me are, there's knowledge, there's reality and existence, and even questioning what is real and our very existence, right? What is the meaning of life? Why do we exist? What happens when we die? That's how I've always thought of philosophy.
Yeah, and the cool thing is the end view, the end in view is wisdom. I mean, you look at the word philosophy etymologically, philo, love of, Sophia, wisdom. Philosophy is supposed to be love of wisdom, and I think that's the coolest metaphor, because an object of love, when you have it, you embrace it, and when you lack it, you pursue it. So philosophy is really the pursuit and embracing of wisdom about living. I had a young guy visit me not too long ago from Madrid, Spain. He came to Wilmington, North Carolina, and we had breakfast together. And he's a very philosophical young man. He's a college student. So he says to me, "What is wisdom?" And I really reflected what you said in your opening remarks. I said, wisdom is mostly about perspective. And then I had an insight I'd never had before. I said, you know what? I think wisdom is about guidance and guardrails. And as a secondary speaker of English, he says, what do you mean guardrails? What are guardrails? I said, well, you're driving down a mountain road, twisty and turny, and there's this metal railing on the side to keep your car from going off. And he said, oh, yeah, guardrails. I said, wisdom is guidance, sort of to inspire us forward, to pursue the right things, and guardrails to keep us from falling off the side of the cliff on the way. So that's what I love about philosophy done right. And it's not always done right in every university context. It can become very abstract, very abstruse, very technical, in emulation of the natural sciences at their loftiest. But basically the core of philosophy is trying to get this wisdom, this perspective about life. Who are we? What's this world all about? What are we supposed to be doing with our lives? And that's why I have so much fun being a philosopher.
I also think one other word I would add to our little cocktail, because we're making lemonade today, or are we not? Yeah. Is that, oftentimes wisdom is associated with experience. Yes. And often experience, rather than celebrating how great we are and our successes, is based on our failures and all the times we messed up, right? Where a wise man will always, or a wise woman will always say, let me help you and guide you, right? Mm-hmm. And guard you such that you don't make the same mistakes that I made. Right. And that is an imparting of knowledge as opposed to a pursuit of knowledge. And I think what happens when you do that and put it all together is you actually see the past, the present, and the future all come together. And that probably provides the ultimate perspective.
You're right. And I love your the way you describe it too, because you describe it as a partnership. Too often we have this image of the philosopher as the lone thinker, the famous Rodin sculpture, which, by the way, Rodin in that sculpture got a lot of things right. His thinker is a very muscular character, so he's a man of action as well as of thought. But I would love to have seen other people in the picture as well, because the pursuit of wisdom is best done in partnership with others. Those who are a little farther down the road, as you've said, those who've lived, had a little more experience, sharing with those of us who are in the middle of life's path, and we can share with those who are just beginning their trek down the road. It's an exciting thing. I think it should be a much bigger part of our culture, a much bigger part of our society. And without that, we get kind of what we see as we look around us these days, right? We don't live in the wisest of times. In fact, I was writing an essay the other day, and I started with the word, we live in challenging times. And it suddenly occurred to me, well, so is everybody else in all of human history. Another essay I was writing, I started with the words, we live in foolish times. And I thought, well, there too, go back and read some of the history, go read the literature written in previous centuries. Everybody's struggled with trying to get things right. So wisdom in our time is an exciting concept, and it's one we greatly need.
We live. Another one is, of course, we live in unprecedented times where we have had unprecedented access to knowledge and information, and yet we're dumber than we've ever been as a human race.
Absolutely right. You know, how do we stay dry when it's raining all around us? You know, you're right. There's so much available to us. So it seemed to me to be a good idea, although it didn't seem to anybody else at the time to be a good idea, for me to leave the university, leave my guaranteed job for life, and to kind of launch out in the culture and try to bring wisdom to where people were. Because it just struck me there are a lot of great philosophers in universities, but why should you have to go to a university to have interaction with a philosopher? So just like you, I try to get out in the world and connect people up together, partner up with people, bring people what I'm learning. And, you know, I've been doing this now for 30 years. We look around us in the world. It's not like I've yet made the world into a wise place. So I still have a lot yet to do.
But I think there's also, you know, and that's, I was thinking of the connections in your life and the connection from teaching to speaking. I believe that they're one and the same, because I think when we're on stage, when we're facilitating a workshop, whether it's a performance or whether it's small and more intimate, at its heart, to me, the essence about what we do is about teaching. And that is about imparting knowledge, but it's also about being able to pass the torch to allow people to make decisions, I guess, for themselves too.
Right. That's very well said. In fact, when you look at the history of the lecture industry in America, people giving talks from platforms and stages, it was folks like Ralph Waldo Emerson, the great philosopher of his time about 150 years ago. Some of the best authors from England came over and would share their knowledge with people all over America. I remember Emerson was going 60, 70 cities a year at a time in American history where travel was almost as hard as it is now. He was going to civic groups and religious groups and business groups and trying to share wisdom. So I think you're exactly right. The best public speakers have always tried to share what they've learned and then spark others to go and learn too. So we do try to pass the torch. So it's not just, okay, I want to download in you guys everything I know. No, I want to stimulate you guys to go learn stuff I haven't even thought of yet. You'll share it with me.
So you're saying that Emerson did not pivot his business to be a virtual speaker?
That's right. I mean, what we've done, right? This is amazing that we've learned to use technology so quickly. And I know plenty of people who were very active public speakers who maybe hadn't done anything by Zoom or Skype or any of the other platforms out there. And now all of a sudden everybody's learning all these new tricks, you know. So I have a well-known psychologist told me about 2 or 3 months ago. He said, I think the next 6 months may be one of the most innovative periods in modern times, because we're forced into it. You know, we could have just coasted, we could have just tread water, but now we're forced to try new things, and perhaps rather than just being a patchwork, you know, let's fix things up until we can get back to normal, we're going to discover new ways of doing things that'll be much better than what we used to do.
So I'm going to ask you a bit of a lateral question in a moment, but first of all, I just want to highlight a mutual friend, and so we can both say hello to Ivy as well, because Ivy connected the two of us. So yes, I have her to thank for this wonderful connection. So yes, just wanted to give her a little shout out, and her beautiful daughter, who I think is a bit of a philosopher too.
Oh, already on LinkedIn, it seems like every day we have some great wisdom from Ivy's daughter, and that bodes well for the future, right? Because she's just a young person starting out, but she's way ahead of the game in terms of what she understands about life.
Exactly, and you know, if you've ever followed a lot of the wisdom and insight from Sir Ken Robinson, you know, most of the optimism and most of the creativity comes from our children, and we have to just fight to resist the urge for it to be sucked away from us by corporations. That's what people need. That's why people need you. So I want to ask you a few questions about you, and specifically, you are billed as a public philosopher. I want to ask you, what is that versus a private one, and what is it? I was just so intrigued by the idea of being the world's happiest philosopher. By definition, are you not meant to be happy? I would love to hear that. And while you're thinking about that, just hello from Chip from I guess NH would be New Hampshire. Steve, Joey, you'll probably meet some of our regulars over there in the Zoom after show. But yeah, so I would love to find out, what is it to be a public happy philosopher?
Well, I was in my office at Notre Dame doing what a philosopher does. This was 30 years ago. I was just doing the philosophical thing. I was thinking, I was sitting in my office, pondering, contemplating, philosophizing. The phone rings. It's a representative of a big group of successful business people asking me to come outside the university and give a talk. And there's a bunch of business owners want me to talk to them on success, a topic I'd never really studied. I'd never really thought about. But I thought, wow, this is great. I mean, sure, I'll do it. And before I could even get out of my office, I got a phone call 30 seconds, 60 seconds later. A publishing company was asking me, would I ever consider writing a book on success, the very same topic. I mean, this was a shock to me, And so I thought, well, my wife will be really proud of me. I go home and tell her, So I run out of my office, I jump in my car, I drive 2 miles home, I come bursting through the front door, and I say to my wife, I just got 2 phone calls. A group of really successful people want me to speak on success. A publishing company wants me to write a book about it. I thought she was going to glow with pride. She just looked really confused, and she said, wait a minute, don't you have to be a success before you can speak and write on success? I said, I am not going to get hung up on a technicality. I'm a student to the wisest people who've ever lived. I'm going to go back and look to see if they had anything to say about this. That's how I became a public philosopher. All of a sudden, I gave a talk to an Oldsmobile Dealers Association on what the philosophers had said about success, something I never learned at Yale or at UNC Chapel Hill. I had to kind of rediscover this whole practical side of philosophy. And so everybody there wanted me to come to their bank or their wife's real estate company, and then all of a sudden I was going around South Bend, Indiana, and the North Midwest, and then the country, and then the world, and it just took off. I became a philosopher pondering in public. And so you didn't have to pay to go to a university. You didn't have to go to a special place. There I was. And I tried to get active. 2 of my friends asked me to get on Twitter in the early days of Twitter. And they just begged me. I thought, well, why do I want to do this? And I put it off, and finally they drove me crazy. So I got on Twitter just to shut them up. And I had 2 followers, those 2 guys, right? That went on for weeks. And I said, guys, I could go in my backyard and talk really loud and reach more people than I do here on Twitter. And they said, hang in there. People are going to want philosophy. They're going to want some wisdom. And then in no time at all, I had 5,000 followers on Twitter. And I thought, really? Is it really? And so from public speeches, from doing books that more than 37 people in the world could understand, and doing books that got launched on ABC television and NBC Today Show and CNN International. And all of a sudden, when I stepped outside the walls of the university, it was like everybody wanted to talk, and nobody had prepared me for that. So I became a public philosopher almost by accident. It wasn't an intention of mine at all, but it's just been this amazing journey now of 30 years. And people say I'm the world's happiest philosopher. It may be like being the world's fastest turtle. I don't know about that, or the thinnest sumo wrestler. But so maybe it's not as impressive as it sounds. But because I've been working with the practical side of philosophy, from the Tao Te Ching and the Analects of Confucius to the Roman Stoics, and all throughout history, looking for the positive ideas that can make a difference for success and fulfillment and happiness and contentment, and how do we deal with disappointment and failure and frustration, and how do you handle anger in your life, and how do you deal well with other people. It's hard to discover all that wisdom and not become more and more optimistic the more you learn, because it's almost like an evolutionary thing. We notice danger and we notice negatives, and we tend to focus on those things. But when we discover the countervailing positives, and especially when we discover how those negatives can become part of a positive, it can change your attitude altogether. Like the old saying, when life hands you lemons, make lemonade. I must have heard that 100 times growing up, but nobody ever said how to do it. So that's how that book came into existence. Well, it was a bank, one of the biggest credit card banks in the world. They were being bought by a bigger institution. And I got a call. I had given 2 or 3 speeches for the bank in the past. And I'd spoken on success. I'd spoken on corporate culture, on partnership, things like that. Have you ever given a talk on how to deal with difficult change? The lady asked me, and I said, no, I never have. And she said, well, we're being bought by a bigger bank. And the day the sale goes through, our boss gets $24 million. But the rest of us don't even know if we're going to have a job, because they have 9,000 credit card people and we have 6,000 credit card people. And we know the organization is not going to end up with 15,000 credit card people. Could you put together something on how to deal with disruption and how to deal with negative possibilities? I said, yeah, sure. Let me look into it. Well, that became the book, Plato's Lemonade Stand, because the philosophers had an awful lot to say about how to turn life's lemons into lemonade. Now, the more you understand this, and we've been talking about resilience in American culture for 20 years. When something bad happens, bounce back. For 10 years, we've been talking about grit. When something bad happens, soldier on, persevere. But lemons to lemonade is different. It doesn't just say when life hands you lemons, bounce back to where you were. It doesn't just say soldier on, stay on the path, persevere. It says stir this, chop this, squeeze this, make this into something really good. Really? We can turn bad things into good things? There's a little book written by a lady in her late 80s. And what you said, Joseph, about experience and wisdom, I've got a copy right on my desk. I keep it close to me. It's called The Measure of My Days, Florida Scott Maxwell. She says, the things in my life I most regretted going through at the time, the things I really disliked, have ironically created within myself the qualities I've most come to treasure and admire. She uses a all-encompassing term of hardihood. She said, they've created in me a kind of hardihood. So as I researched for my talk for that bank, and I gave my talk, a 45-minute talk called The Art of Change, and everybody went nuts, and they said it changed the whole atmosphere in the bank. And I spoke to hundreds of people that day, and a lady came up to me, surprised me, and said, I was an Olympic swimmer. And my coach, what he tried for 15 years to teach me, you taught me in 45 minutes. You said it all in 45 minutes, what he never quite could articulate. And I said, well, it's just because I'm not making this up. It's not my ideas. I'm using the greatest minds that have ever lived, and I'm just bringing you their greatest hits. And that's what stirred into this book, which a book on difficulty, it took me 15 years to write it. I wrote it 25 times through. It had 5 different titles. I mean, it's the most difficult time I'd ever had writing a book, and it's a book on difficulty. So I decided I'll never write a book on death or on anything too scary, because it tends to come back and bite me. But I'll use the lessons of the book while writing the book. I mean, it was the most amazing thing, Joseph. And that's part of my happiness as a philosopher. It's just that I've discovered, it's almost like we've been tossed into this raging sea, and the great philosophers have for us the best water wings, to keep us afloat.
I was just thinking, if you did do a book on death, there would just be a first edition. So it would be more valuable, posthumously.
Come back and finish do the epilogue, right?
You could come and haunt your publisher.
Right.
You said a lot, and I want to try and unpack that a little bit, because the one thing that I picked up is happiness is infectious. Happiness and I suffer from this too, in a good way. It's almost like verbal diarrhea. When you're so happy, you can't control. You don't want to control yourself. You just. And when happy people are around happy people, it's infectious too. Yeah. But what I was thinking about is, I was trying to think about your, as you called it, unlikely success. And your unlikely success, I jotted down 4 things to kind of reframe what you were saying. Number 1, focus. The fact that you focused on optimism and happiness, that you pursued it, It was David Ogilvy, great ad man of Madison Avenue, once said, we should pursue the truth like a pig pursues truffles. The second is being a public philosopher, and a happy one is it seems like asking more questions than giving answers is part of that process. And then the third and fourth, which I jotted down afterwards, was coming in as an outsider, not being that what I would call a chronic public speaker or keynote speaker, where it becomes rote and formulaic, and where arrogance can creep in, which is where number 4 comes into it, which is humility. Because part of asking questions, more questions and giving answers, is also being able to say, hey, I don't know all the answers, but maybe you do.
And that's very well said. And when you do get an answer, it tends to generate 3 more questions, So one man actually hired me 29 times to give the same speech to different groups he did business with. And he went with me every time. At about time number 19, I said, aren't you sick to death of hearing me give the same talk? He said, no, you never give the exact same talk. You're not one of these guys that it's the push the play button on the tape recorder and you get what he says to every other group. You're always learning. You're always bringing in new things you've read, movies you've seen, ideas that have occurred to you, in the cab on the way to the hotel. He said, you're sort of thinking out loud with us. And he said, I always get something new. It's like a new experience every time. Well, that's the cool thing about being a philosopher, because I don't think I've got all this stuff figured out, but I've got lots of ideas I want to share with others, and they're going to give me their own spin that will then help me to go the next few steps, right? So that's the exciting thing about the process of doing wisdom together. And I know you must feel that all the time with the guests that you have on this show, right? You end up thinking together and talking together in a way that you by yourself, sitting in your study all alone, couldn't have come up with all this stuff, but we spark each other, and you mentioned about happiness being contagious. Well, so is the opposite, right? I mean, it's almost like social tuning. The people we're around can really affect us. Like if all you study is the kind of the darkest existentialist philosophy, you're going to end up with the black turtleneck and the scowl on your face, but there's so much more than that. So you used a phrase earlier about not just optimism, but realistic optimism. And that's what philosophers always want to pull people back to. Not empty positive thinking, not cavorting in fields of hyperbole when the real truth is exciting enough, but to give people, real wisdom. And that makes all the difference, I think.
So we're going to get into your books, specifically the one behind me. And a couple of the others, and I love your approach. But I was curious, if you look back, and if there's time, maybe we'll ask it in the after show, because I'm curious as to who your favorite philosophers are of the greats and maybe in recent times.
Yeah.
But I'll save those questions in the interest of time. Instead, here's what I wanted to ask you, which is, whether it's Aristotle, whether it's Socrates, whether it's Plato, and we're going to reference all 3 of them. What would they say if they were alive today? What would they say when looking at the world, being able to zoom out and recognize what's happening in the world today, in the United States today, in Minneapolis today? How would they interpret all of this?
I think they would actually be excited about what they're seeing, because out of chaos comes clarity. Winston Churchill once said, you can always depend on Americans to try the right thing once they've tried everything else, right? There's a pendulum swing in human life from one extreme to another. And I used to say years ago, to people, the worse things become, the more of an optimist I become. And they say, well, how does that work? I said, well, people can tolerate unbelievably bad circumstances, but when things get literally intolerable, then that's a wake-up call to everybody. It gets their imaginations in gear. I remember visiting the Soviet Union, or visiting Russia right after the breakup of the Soviet Union, going to St. Petersburg and looking around the city. I was there for a while, and noticing the weeds everywhere, the grass 3 feet high, and the weeds and the graffiti and the rust and just the ugliness everywhere, aside from the beautiful 19th century palaces that were kept in great shape as tourist places, but just the way they had deteriorated under communism. And I said to my wife, how do people live like this? Well, it's the old famous boiled frog syndrome, right? People could tolerate amazingly bad stuff until it got to a point of being literally intolerable. I think the great philosophers would be excited about our day, because we may be in the run-up to a new openness for real wisdom when people have tried everything else and it's obviously not worked, and things get bad enough so that people say, okay, where are the answers? And then the philosophers come forward and say, hey, we've been going through versions of these problems for millennia. No real problem, human problem, is ever completely new. It's always a version of something we've experienced before. There was the bubonic plague, there was the Black Death, there was a where maybe a couple 100 million people were killed, and that was the end of the Middle Ages and the beginning of what? The Renaissance. Right, that led to Geoffrey Chaucer, and that led to Boccaccio, and that led to Galileo, and that led to just unbelievable stuff. So, if we can hang in there and manage what we're going through as wisely as we can, and those who aren't doing that, well, maybe they'll hit bottom and bounce back. Maybe they'll have a new openness to real wisdom about life. So that's why I'm hopeful at a time like this.
So it's almost like we need to hit rock bottom, or we need to feel where the bottom is, and then triangulate, or at least be able to kind of work our way back up.
It's only when you're given really bitter, sour lemons that you even think about making lemonade, right? If people were just giving us peaches and apples and bananas, it's like, oh, good, fine, But you're given lemons, you bite into it. Well, I'm not going to be able to eat this. I got to do something with this, and then you get creative, right? And so I searched the wisdom of the ages about how do you get creative? How do you do what Florida Scott Maxwell said and turn the bad into the good? How does this work? And so that's how I structured my book, Plato's Lemonade Stand. I discovered 3 what I call arts of change, and I've used them in my own life, and it's been just revolutionary. I've always been a relatively optimistic person. I've always characterized myself as a short-term pessimist and a long-term optimist. Short-term, any stupid thing can happen, right? Be ready for it. But long-term, we can weave something really interesting here. We can create something great.
So we're going to talk about that right now. But first, I'm going to just play a little bit of a game with you. I always find what I would consider to be an esoteric, but also a very apt quote. And then I play a game which is guess who said the quote, knowing full well that there's no chance that they will actually guess the person. So this is your quote for today, which I'm still laughing at it. Actually, when I found it, I don't know why, I just got essentially the giggles, which is at my lemonade stand, I used to give the first glass away free and charge $5 for the second glass. The refill contained the antidote.
I love that. So who said
any
it?
Guesses?
Yeah. Socrates. The internet says Socrates.
And so close. It was Emo Phillips, American stand-up comedian, actor, voice actor, writer, and producer. I just thought you would like that.
Yeah, he's really good. He's one of those guys who do absurdist humor really well, right? Stephen Wright is another such guy.
Yeah.
I love people like this because a lot of philosophy is playing with the absurd, so these guys are very philosophical humorists, and they will spark insight. That was good. I like that.
So let me ask you, and we're going to get into this wonderful book in a moment, and I know I keep saying that because it's so hard because I just want to keep talking with you about everything else. But an interesting comment, which is, the bottom is a depressing goal. Yeah. And I won't comment on it. I'll let you comment on that in terms of addressing that, and then we'll move forward.
Okay, the bottom. This is our quote we're contemplating, right?
Yeah, well, I think it's this idea that sometimes, as you said, you're a short-term pessimist. This idea that sometimes great innovation and change and optimism can come from hitting the bottom, or at least from, as you say, the Renaissance following the bubonic plague.
Yeah.
I mean, my prompt here would be: I don't think we're pursuing the bottom.
No.
I don't think we welcome it.
No.
But I think we know it when we hit it.
Yeah.
And we use that as a springboard or almost a leap pad, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, you don't have to pursue the bottom. It's going to find, if you're drunk enough, it's going to find you, right? I mean, if you're struggling enough, if you're tripping enough, if you're falling over your own feet, if you have no ability to get out of your own way, you're going to find the bottom, and it will find you. You're not going to have to seek it, right? And then the question is what to do with it. And there's always been the world's spiritual traditions have always talked about weaving suffering into depth. I had a professor at Yale who, the first time I sat down in his office, he was a theologian. He said, Tom, I think most people suck the foam off the beer of life and never taste the beer itself. And I said, Hans, that's a great image. Tell me more. And he said, too many people live superficially. They just seek for the superficial pleasures. But they don't understand they're sucking the foam off the beer. The beer might be a little bitter at first, but as you grow accustomed to this flavor and this depth, you begin to understand there's so much more than the foam. And I said, wow, that's quite an insight, right? So I look at myself. You mentioned, going out for a run. I hurt my shoulder doing exercise. When I was 58 years old, I'm 68 now. When I was 58, I decided to get in shape because I saw too many people in my neighborhood who could barely walk down the sidewalk. So I'd never done bench press. And I saw a guy about my age. He had 85 pounds, so I tried it. And so I got a guy came up to me once, and after a couple months, he said, "You make more noise than anybody else in this gym." And I said, "Really? You should hear me get up and walk to the bathroom in the morning." My whole body was just aching, And I was a stiff old man at the age of 58. And he said, "I want to be your workout partner because you're the only guy who's really trying." Well, to tell you the amount of pain this guy put me through, let's put on more weight today. Let's put on more weight today. So by the time I'm 63 years old, he had gotten me from 85 pounds to 315 pounds.
Wow.
But only through a lot of pain and suffering along the way. But I was stronger than I was in my 20s or 30s. And I thought, wow, is this a metaphor for those things that we struggle with in life? Somebody asked me the other day, can our difficulties and our struggles always deepen us and grow us? I said, well, if we let them. It's almost like we have to partner up with our difficulties. We can't just expect the bad things to have good results as if there's some magic out there independent of us, But I like the term alchemy used in the Middle Ages about turning regular metals into gold and coming up with an elixir of life that would make ordinary lives extraordinary and immortal. The spiritual quest was always ordinary to extraordinary, transformation, fundamental metamorphosis. That's lemons to lemonade. That's difficulty to delight. And that's up to us. Are we going to become alchemists of the spirit? Are we going to partner up with our difficulties? A concept that just came to me for the first time a few days ago. I've always thought about partnership as, you and I partner up and we do something like this show, right? But we can partner up with our difficulties. We can bring energy, activity, focus, concentration with the difficulty, which is maybe hiding some opportunity. And that's the only way we discover the opportunity. That's the only way we grow. That's the only way we become better. And we can become better at doing that. So it's just an exciting process.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very rich one as well, because the idea of partnership, as opposed to this idea of standing off, or what do they say? The even the concept of what's it? Not compression, but contrition. And it's almost like it is embracing and recognizing fundamentally that it's not about optimism or pessimism. It's a bit of a cocktail, right? In this recipe for lemonade, there's at the end of the day, right, there's sweet and sour.
That's right.
It is the mix of it together.
That's right. You're absolutely right.
Now you
go ahead.
No, I was going to say, you spoke about this idea of the art of change.
Yeah.
And immediately I jumped on the word art, not science, but art.
Right.
So talk a little bit about why this is an art, and you know, and I don't even think of, when I think of artists and philosophers, I'm not necessarily thinking of the same group, but somehow there's this another partnership developing, and then maybe you can lead into the three arts that you discuss in the book, and I will magically show those arts on the screen.
Well, you know, early on, I was these business groups wanted me to talk about success, and I discovered 7 universal conditions for success, and I wrote a book called True Success, came out in 1994. And the more I spoke on these 7 things, these 7 tools, there you go. The more I came to realize there's a skilled behavior connected to each one. You can get better at conceiving of a goal, your conception of a new goal. You can get better at building confidence. You can get better at concentration. Well, everything that's a skilled activity, well, that kind of makes it an art. So I thought about, okay, how do artists work and how do they get better? How do you improve a skill? The first day you step on a tennis court or a golf course, you're not going to be very good, right? But anything worth doing is worth doing badly at first for a while to get better. Well, maybe not neurosurgery and airline piloting, but you know, most things. You get started, you make your mistakes, you learn as you go. When you think of life as involving a cluster of arts, like the art of perspective, there are some people that are better at perspective than others. In fact, we can talk about that if you like. I've got a great image about that. I was writing my first novel. Here, my desk is full of these books. The Oasis Within, a little short novel. And it came to me as a movie playing in my head. I didn't intend to be a fiction writer. And now I've written 8 books of fiction, all in a big series. But
amazing.
It came to me as a big movie. I'm having breakfast in the kitchen, and all of a sudden I see an old man and a young boy, and they're sitting in the sand in the desert someplace, and they're having this amazing conversation. I run upstairs and start typing 10 pages. I put it on Huffington Post. Within an hour, I'm getting emails from all over the world. What is this? This is great. What is this? I didn't know what it was, but one of the images in those first 10 pages was this. The old man says to the boy, "Have you ever seen a telescope?" And this is in Egypt in 1934. And the boy said, "Yeah, a guy came through the village not too long ago with a telescope." And I was amazed. I held it up to my eye and I looked through it, and far away things looked close up, and you know, small things looked really big. And the old man said, "Yeah, when I was a boy, very same thing. A man gave me a telescope, and I looked through it like you did. And it blew everything up, made everything look close. And then I don't know what made me do this, but I thought to turn the telescope around. I was just as amazed. Close things looked far away, big things looked really small." And I came to realize something that day. And the boy says, "Well, what was that?" And he says, "We all have in our hearts and in our minds an emotional telescope. When anything bad happens, we tend to look through the little end like everybody else, and we blow it up and make it bigger than it is and make it closer than it is and more daunting. But we can turn that telescope around too and look through the other end and shrink things down to size." And the boy said, "I've never thought about that." And the old man says, "And here's the thing about the wisdom of perspective. Once you've done that enough times and you've given this yourself a sense that you can shrink problems down, you know, you're big enough, you're powerful enough to deal with this. Once you gain the wisdom of perspective, you can just eventually put the telescope down and look at things as they are and know that you're not going to confront anything that you can't in some way handle." I mean, that was, to me, the old man was talking to me and giving me wisdom that I ended up having to use very shortly after that. Something bad happened. I can't remember if it was a letter I got with some bad news or something. And I said to myself, turn the telescope around. Right away, I felt my emotions settle down. So perspective can be an art. You can get better at doing that, in which case you become more peaceful inside and you become more creative, because you're not suffering under undue stress. You know, you're able to get control inwardly and then move outwardly. Some of the best philosophers have always taught us that life is an inner game. we get right on the inside, and then we can bring it to the world in positive ways. So yeah, the arts of change, the arts of life, the arts of living. To think of life that way, you become better and better, and you understand the inherent creativity in what we're called upon to do by challenging circumstances.
Well, we won't go into some of the specifics because people can get that by reading the book, and I will post a link to the Amazon page shortly. But there are 3 specific arts that you talk about: self-control, positive action, and achievement. And I would love for you to just briefly chat about them.
Yeah, the art of self-control is important. Anything bad happens, anything disruptive happens, anything that you didn't ask for or look for or hope for, and it seems to knock you off your path, right? There are 3 things. There are 3 demands, 3 rules in the art of self-control. Don't rush to judgment, number 1. Don't be too quick to say this is terrible or this is wonderful. Either way, you can get yourself off track, right? There could be irrational exuberance as well as undue depression about something. Don't rush to judgment. Number 2, value the right things. If you just value comfort and security, any change is going to throw you off. But if you value growth, if you value learning, if you value creativity, then you're going to confront a disruptive change very differently. And number 3, use your imagination well. We tend to do worst case scenario imaginings, which quickly for a lot of people become worst case scenario believings. If we use our imaginations well and realize that, uncertainty, there's a chapter in the Oasis Within called The Gift of Uncertainty. Uncertainty can be an amazing gift. It's an open field of possibilities. It's an open field of creative opportunities. So if you don't rush to judgment, don't be too quick to say, this is terrible, this is the worst thing that's ever happened. And if you value the right things, the things that equip you to make the most of any challenge, and if you use your imagination well, not just doing worst case scenario imaginings, but to say, okay, let's imagine positive steps I could take here. What are the first steps? What are the second steps? And one of the first steps may be to find somebody to talk to about the problem, find a partner, at least a thought partner, right? Because we rarely do our most creative things alone. In solitariness. The history of innovation is a history of groups of people together, sparking each other onto great things. So that's the art of self-control. You got to just calm down. The Stoics said hardly anything's as good as it seems or as bad as it seems. So just calm down. And then we have the second art, the art of positive action.
Well,
once you've gotten control.
I want to just stop you for one second, because I actually think a couple of comments I just wanted to bring into it because I thought it was great. Yeah. This was actually said earlier by David Libby, who said, what do you do when you hit bottom? You ask for help. And I think that just echoes what you said. And then I'm not sure what to make of this, but I thought it's a nice new thought. And I know certainly when I write and people bring in new ideas, I love that. But Kent Tomaselli said sometimes the telescope lens could use a cleaning as well. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but it sounds interesting enough that I wanted to share it with you.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that's really good. If your lens is blurry, so will be your vision, right? If your lens is dirty, your vision will be blurry. So that's what I love about a good metaphor. It can be taken in many different ways and then proves its worth in ways you didn't initially anticipate. So that's a great suggestion.
All right. So the second is the art of positive action.
Yeah. So once you calm down a little bit, once you got a place of peace and power in your heart, to some extent, we're not perfect at this, then the art of positive action itself has 3 rules, right? It says, number 1, govern your attitudes. Back to pessimism and optimism a little bit, right? Both attitudes tend to be self-fulfilling in this really ironic and strange way. But the explanation for that is the optimist will at least try to draw on the resources he or she has. The pessimist won't even try, because what's the point? He thinks it won't work. The thing is always, and I've known people who were both attitudes, optimists and pessimists. The thing that's always puzzled me is the pessimists are always trying to talk us optimists into giving up optimism and becoming pessimists. They are trying to argue us into pessimism. And if they're truly pessimists, don't they realize it won't work? I mean, that's the ironic thing about it all, right? Govern your attitudes. Number 2, look for opportunities. The world is an ever-changing kaleidoscope of patterns that are altering all the time. Heraclitus in 500 BCE said, things are always changing. One other translation is everything is always changing. But with every turn of the kaleidoscope, there are new patterns, there are new opportunities. So govern your attitudes, right? Have a realistic optimism. Don't be tied up in negative attitudes, resentment and bitterness and disappointment. And so many things can hold us back in life. If you can shed those attitudes and move toward more positive attitudes, then it becomes easier to do number two, look for opportunities. And number three, once you see an opportunity that's right for you, and not every opportunity is an opportunity for you, might be an opportunity for somebody, but you got to have a little self-knowledge thrown into this to know that it's right for you. Take initiative. The most successful people in all of human history, in good times and bad times, have been people who took action. People who didn't analyze endlessly, who didn't ponder forever, but who had an action approach to life, and then redo and adjust and adapt and innovate your innovations, but you have to be moving forward. You know, Aristotle said we learn by doing, and he was so right about that. So you have the art of self-control, basically calm down. You have the art of positive action, you know, search around with a positive attitude, find a way forward, a path for your action. And then you have the art of achievement, the final art, which has 7 things, 7 components, not 3. The other 2 have 3. There's 7 things that are basically what I call the 7 C's of success. You got to have a clear conception of what you, at least a next step, right? You don't have to see 5 years from now what's going to be happening, but a clear conception of the first thing you're going to do to try to improve your situation. You've got to build some confidence. Too many people look to their circumstances to give them confidence. The best, most successful people in any field tend to be people who bring confidence to their circumstances. And each of these other things, a focused concentration on what it takes, a stubborn consistency, an emotional commitment, a good character, a capacity to enjoy the process. So we've exercised self-control, then we've launched out in action, but we want it to be successful action, and that's where the art of achievement comes in. And that's where your lemonade making goes through all its stages, and you have the refreshing beverage at the end when everything goes right.
Well, let me tell you, I do not feel dehydrated, and if anything, I feel hydrated, but my lips are parched because I literally and figuratively want some lemonade, some of your lemonade. You know, Tom, I love the way that you have taken or brought together philosophy into what is, quite frankly, our lives, into current affairs, into business. Maybe we'll talk about Socrates in Silicon Valley. That was one of your other books. Or if Aristotle ran General Motors, I wonder what he would have done with General Motors. But the other thing that I just thought as a final thought from my perspective is, I love how you've branched into fiction, into writing a novel, and yet the common thread is still there. The red thread is still there, which is the lessons, the learnings, the practices, the wisdom of the ancient and even more current philosophers, of which you are the most current one.
Well, you know, a lot of people don't know J.K. Rowling was a classics major and really understood Plato and Aristotle and Cicero and Seneca and Marcus Aurelius. So she uses those to define her characters. So I wrote a book called If Harry Potter Ran General Electric, because I saw all this wisdom in the Harry Potter stories. You read The Three Musketeers, it's a great story about partnership. That didn't surprise me. I just read Dracula for the first time 6 months ago. It's a great book about the power of partnership. I read The Odyssey 4 times last year, probably times 7, 8, 9, and 10 in my life, and finally realized that the Odyssey is about purpose, the power of purpose in our lives. And so great literature has always conveyed great ideas. A famous novelist once said to me in a private conversation, he said, "I'm doing the same thing you're doing, Tom." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "We're both trying to understand the human condition. We just do it differently. We're trying to dig down to the bottom of you and get to the bottom of human nature." He said to me, great literature is never just about the beauty of the language in the book. Great literature is always about the importance of the ideas that are conveyed in the story. And I thought, wow. He said, it's not going to be a pedantic book. It won't be a book that's just about ideas. But he said the story will deepen your perspective on something important. I thought, wow, that's interesting.
Well, we are going to, if you loved Tom, don't just give the like Facebook button. Come and hang out with us in the Zoom after show, bit.ly/CoronaTV after show. And for those of you that are watching, this happens from time to time. I get an email where someone goes, this person is waiting on your Zoom call, and it's like 4 days after the show. So if you're watching this and it's not live, you can still actually just look on Facebook and you'll find the Zoom after show. But for now, Tom and I are going to go over. Tom, I've changed your bio. You are now the world's strongest public philosopher, multiple author and professor. I've replaced happiness with bench pressing ability. This has been a real pleasure, and I just want to thank you for your time and for your continued time in the Zoom after show.
Oh, thank you for what you do. It was a gift to me to meet you, Joseph. You're a very wise person, and I hope we can continue to talk into the future. Thanks.
We certainly will. And if you didn't get this, tomvmorris.com. There's so much that you should. I've put the link in Facebook and all over social media. Buy his books and spend more time with him too. So right back at you, Tom. All right, everybody, I will see you in the Zoom after show. Otherwise, tomorrow I will be back. And take care of yourselves. Be safe and stay cool.